I'll get my audio testing. Everybody still hear me back there? In the back, if you're raised, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a brisk morning. I'm glad you're here. Glad we've got so many guests among us. I'd like to kind of introduce myself to you since there's many guests among us. My name's Dave Galloway. I've been a Christian for a while, and it's by the grace of God that I'm able to follow him, and he's been extremely patient with me. I've had many struggles in my life before becoming a Christian and even after becoming a Christian, but they've been kind of different after I became a Christian. They'd be struggles in which I would go to God in prayer. I would seek help. I'd seek guidance. I'd seek out even other people of his children, other Christians. And I'd explain my problems and explain my unrest and my sorrow, and they'd relate to me what they learned from Scripture. And that's what I'd like to do with you this morning. I'm going to be continuing on with Matthew chapter 5 and verse 9. From Ryan's request, he had asked me to continue on this section of the Beatitudes where Jesus says, "Blessed are those who," and identify for us with Matthew 5 and verse 9. But before I do that, I'd like to introduce it this way. R.T. France says, "In a world characterized by conflict and rivalry, a keeper of the peace is rare, a peacemaker still rarer." A.T. Robertson says, "It's hard enough to keep the peace. It is still more difficult to bring peace where it is not." And thinking about peace and thinking about not having it, a psalmist of the Old Testament said, "All nations surrounded me. They surrounded me on every side. They surrounded me like bees." And in our text this morning of Matthew chapter 5 and verse 9, Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Now, to understand this verse and the full effect that Jesus is saying and describing for us is first to understand, well, what is a peacemaker? And when we think about that, this is really the only passage of Scripture where that word's used, peacemaker. And so we know that a person that is a maker of peace is someone who, in the very sense of the word maker, is someone who creates, someone who pulls out from immaterial, where there is no peace, and then creates it. He moves from a state of absence of peace and develops it in its place. And that's what a maker of peace is. So what is peace? Well, the Greek word talks about a peacemaker as, simply stated, one who makes peace, a creator of peace where there is originally no peace. So in this lesson, what I'd like to do is establish this foundation of what peace is, and then we're going to see what peace looks like. And finally, we'll conclude with Jesus' persuasive words, what I'd say is the most persuasive words in the English language, of how he concludes that verse. A peacemaker. What is peace? In our New Testaments, it's often translated as one, peace, quietness, and rest. Or in other places, we might think of it as a war and peace, a state of national tranquility, exemption from the rage and havoc of war, peace between individuals, harmony, security, and safety. And perhaps it's best even to see it as a contrast. Right? We can see peace as the opposite of peace in the sense of Romans chapter 2 and verses 9 and 10. Where Paul states, "There will be tribulation and distress to every human being who does evil, the Jew first and also the Greek. But glory, honor, and peace for everyone who does good. So that gives us an idea of what peace is. And really, we know what peace is, right? We understand that even in the car this morning, it's kind of chilly. So I turned the heat up. I'm in a state of unrest. It's not comfortable. Bryn in the back reminds me, I'm cold. Where's your jacket? It's there. A state of unrest, without peace, discomfort. What does a peacemaker look like? Well, I'll tell you what it doesn't look like. If you look over with me in James chapter 2, James chapter 2, beginning in verse 14. What I'd like to do here is identify for us this text of unrest, where there's this lack of peace. And the writer, James, identifies for us that some people are confused and they're in a state of peace when actually they ought not to be because of how they understand faith. And then I'll relate with you a story in the Old Testament that talks about a great challenge that we all have. In James chapter 2, beginning in verse 14. And remember, he's talking to people who claim that they're Christians, or they are Christians, but they're just lacking some understanding. He says, "What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith, but does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, be warmed and filled,' without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead." Do you see the confusion? They thought just by saying it, it'd be okay. I've got faith that it'll be okay. You have faith that it'll be okay. But the reality is, do you know how God brings peace to people sometimes when they're in the state of unrest? They're in a state of war, where they're not in a state of quietness. He sends His children. He sends His children to do things that are difficult, to sacrifice, to extend their own self, to face loss so that another might have gain, to lose your time, finances, emotional distress for caring for others who are in unrest. And this is what happens for Esther. Esther was in the palace of the king when the command was sent that the Jews were to be destroyed, and Mordecai says this to Esther. Now, put yourself in Esther's shoes here. She is in a place of great provision. To be in the king's palace is where everything's supplied. You're not in danger. You have great security. And you don't really have to lift a finger to do much at all to provide for yourself, because the king does that for you. Mordecai said to Esther, who is a Jew, "Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" In Esther 4, 13 and 14. Do you see how timely Mordecai is describing this for her? Her whole nation of people are in a state of distress. The edict has gone out. They're to be destroyed by anybody who wants to. And Mordecai says, do you think you're going to not be destroyed because of this too? Just simply because you're in the king's palace? Esther had a hard decision to make. I wonder if we make that same decision that she did. To go out and do what's unthinkable. To put your life on the line, to provide for your people. And perhaps we can even disguise our words like this. Consider this. We hear of someone's sickness, someone's ailment, physical sickness, or perhaps a spiritual struggle that they're facing. Maybe that their family is facing. Maybe somebody like a son needing to address something with his father, or a daughter needing to address something with her mother. Someone's doing something that's terribly sinful. And you know it. And perhaps you don't see the great responsibility that God is putting on your shoulders to go to their aid, to help deliver them from the sinfulness that they're in. You've heard it said, well, I'll pray for you. To our friend, to our brother or sister in need. And then we catch ourselves forgetting about that, don't we? Oh yes, I'll pray for you. I will definitely pray for that. But perhaps we're the one in need instead of another one coming to us. And perhaps what we do in need is we don't voice our need. We think to ourselves, well, I'll just have to deal with this. Or perhaps if you're like me, I'm embarrassed. Surely I'm the only one that struggles with this. Surely children have overcome these obstacles that I'm facing. But the reality is, we're all faced with temptation. Different parts of our lives reveal different challenges, different, perhaps what we should view them as opportunities where God is growing our faith, and that we have failed. And it's tough to reveal that to one another. But sometimes we need to. Sometimes we need the help. And sometimes we need those peacemakers. We might say, God be with to the point of which we disassociate ourselves from being with someone. Perhaps what we're asking God to do is send someone when we ought to be saying, God, here am I, send me, as Isaiah did. And so to close out that idea, a peacemaker then practices a faith that goes to work. A peacemaker is one who trusts and hopes in God to help us carry out His will. Whether we're the ones seeking peace, suspending our trust, and stretching ourselves to trust others in our most vulnerable state by revealing something we're struggling with. So here's what a peacemaker looks like. What Abigail does in 1 Samuel 25 is an excellent example of what a peacemaker looks like. But I want to hold off on her for just a moment. And I'd like to show you what a peacemaker looks like in 2 Kings chapter 5. If you're a student of the Bible, you'll know that this is the reference to Naaman and some other people that are involved in his life. And I'd like to identify kind of in our minds two columns, if you will, to follow this text in 2 Kings chapter 5. First you have Naaman, who is a leper. He's a very successful man. He's the commander of the Syrian army. The Lord has given him great success. And he is very well provided for in the terms of worldly standards. And yet he is described as a man with leprosy. And so we can put him in a point of being at unrest. He is not at peace. So he's in one column. He is a man seeking a peacemaker. And in the other column, I'd like for you to identify the peacemaker. But in this text, there's so many peacemakers. Okay? The first peacemaker starts with a willingness to listen and share a message of peace to those without peace. Okay, sounds a lot like evangelism, doesn't it? A peacemaker who is willing to listen and share a message of peace to those without peace. In this text, we're introduced to a young Israelite girl that was taken when Syria raided their city, or at least their house or that area. The Syrians raided and took her from her home. And now she is a servant to the mistress. What I would suggest in this context is being described as, so Naaman is the master, and the mistress is his wife. Mistress here simply being the feminine word for master. Okay? There's no mastress. It's mistress. It's not anything else in this context being described. So in the great distress of Naaman, it comes to her attention that this little girl, she says, "I wish that my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria. Then he would cure him of his leprosy." And so this child who listens to the person in distress says, "I have a peacemaker for you. Let me tell you where he is, and let me tell you what he can do for you." She tells this to the mistress, and you know what the mistress does? She tells this to Naaman. And you know what Naaman does? Naaman tells this to the king of Syria. Now, do you see how all this started? It started with one child willing to listen and willing to speak of the peacemaker. Now think about the peace seeker. Now, if we're thinking about evangelism, where would this little girl be? She's an introducer. She's a one person who says, there's something that you can have hope in. I'd like for you to consider it. And then she just recedes into the background. She's not mentioned anymore in this story. And so as we think about evangelism, we don't have to think about how do we convert someone in this one moment. Or to think of ourselves as, I've got this great responsibility to pour out the gospel message, this good news for this person so that they can have it right now in this package. Sometimes that's just not the case. Sometimes we just need to plant the seed and then let the person seeking the peace go after it. And that is exactly what Naaman did. He went after this man in Samaria. Naaman seeks the prophet to heal him. He's given time to find it. And in all this, you've got sacrifice and hopefulness. Because if you've read the story before, at the very end, he's wanting to give the prophet, after he's cured, he's wanting to give him riches and changes of clothes and give this huge expression of gratitude to him. And so what he's doing is he's coming with this huge caravan of gifts. Why does he do that? Because a cure is worth sacrificing for. And when you're at a state of unrest and disquietness and you're seeking peace, you're willing to sacrifice that and you're willing to hope for that when no other cure is available. This is what Naaman was after. But then you remember he goes to the prophet, and the prophet doesn't even come out. He doesn't do what's expected by Naaman, and so he leaves. He's angry. And he says, I thought that he would have done this and this and this, but he didn't. And all of his seeking of peace, it wasn't given to him. He was angry about it, and then you see a servant cultivating the seed, helping Naaman to see that peace is right there if he'd just look past your emotions, look past what you had expected it to be. And he said, didn't the prophet say if you dipped 7 times in the Jordan, you would be healed? Well, yeah. And it's almost like the servant saying, well, did you do that? Did you trust what he was saying? No. You see, it's too simple, isn't it? See, even a child could do that. His hopefulness was overcome with this anger of what he had expected it to be, but now it's brought back to him. You're seeking peace. It's there for you to reach out and have it if you just do what the prophet said. You will be cured. Let's just try it. Let's just try it and see what will happen. So Naaman trusted the word. He went into the water and dipped and came up whole. His body was in harmony with itself. And in 2 Kings chapter 5, in the second part of verse 14, his flesh was restored like the flesh of a child, and he was clean. Do you want that? Abigail in 1 Samuel chapter 25, when she comes to David after David in his anger approaches pursuing Nabal to destroy him after he had provided for Nabal's flocks and herds in the pastures, keeping them safe where they had lacked nothing. Comes to Nabal on the feast day and says, hey, I'd wonder if you'd like to be returning of the favor, because I've done this, and we'd really appreciate if you could provide us with some food. Here we are on your day of feast. I wonder if you'd do that for us. And Nabal more or less curses David, disdains David, shows him great disrespect. And David says, every man strap on his sword. Far be it from me if there be any man left in Nabal's household. And the ones seeking peace that knew this, go back and tell Abigail. And Abigail, in great haste, gets cartloads of food and cartloads of provisions for David and his men. And they are, I mean, you can just see it, can't you? Just this going down the road. Maybe there wasn't a road to where David and his men were and where they were coming from. And maybe it just ran out, and you just see a line of servants coming with food while you're coming with anger and vengeance and ready for war and ready for bloodshed to kill and destroy Nabal and his men for this great disgrace that he's showing. And Abigail comes throwing herself down. And she says in verse 24, on me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. Now, to come to this point and understand what could have happened, I mean, this really for David is just a small bump in the road. He could have told one of his men, kill her, we'll eat these provisions, on to Nabal's house. But the reality of seeking peace is just that, isn't it? When we're seeking peace, and it's someone who is near to us that has caused the unrest, the disharmony, and all we want is just the peace just needs to come back, because this is too much. This is too much. There's war on the doorfront. We need to do something about this. And in fact, I need to do something about this. And so she does everything within her power and says, let me bear 100% of the guilt. Would you be willing to do that? You know, as parents, having children, if they do something that requires a debt to be paid, who's responsible? Well, you might say, well, that all depends. If they're a teenager and they're just goofing off and they can make money and they mess something up, well, they pay for it. I could see that. But what if they're not? What if they're younger? What if they do something that's irreparable and that costs you a lot? Would you be willing to put your anger aside of what it cost and confidently say, I'm so glad that I can bring peace to this situation? Because the reality is, our children grow up and they bring unrest and disharmony upon themselves to a point where we are powerless. Where the training has been set and they don't listen to it perhaps as they grow older, and then that burden is irreparable. We'd love to be able to take the debt. We'd love to be able to bring peace and harmony. But perhaps that time is already gone. If you remember later with the reference to Abigail, this event evolves into Abigail becoming a wife to the king. She'd humbled herself. She trusted doing what's right above what was convenient. And she sought out peace with her very being, willing to sacrifice herself to have it. That's what a peacemaker looks like. It doesn't have to carry out every single aspect for the peace seeker, but perhaps just planting the seed. But it also has to, for the peace maker, has to be one willing to sacrifice to have it. So, our last point this morning, why would I ever want to be a peacemaker? And I preceded in the lesson this as the phrase that is just one of the most motivating, most persuasive that we could perhaps even imagine that Jesus could say. He says in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 9, "They shall be called sons of God." Now, being a son of God is being in a relationship in which you are loved so much, cared for with such knowledge of how you are specifically able to be cared for, that once you see that there's no other father you could even imagine having, once you see that, Once you, as the psalmist said, taste and see that it is good, once you see that, there's no turning back. You don't want to turn back. Because there's this overwhelming flood of how much God loves us if we devote ourselves to His Word and see it. You know, this is what we're doing this morning. You know that, right? You know, we can all stand up here and give speeches all day long, and they can be accurate and truthful to the Word of God. But if we don't open our heart to see this, and let the impact of God saving this Word for us through all time, making sure it's unadulterated and that it's pure, and making sure that we have enough time, insert your lifetime, to devote to it. And then enabling us to have moments where we have to stretch our faith so that we can experience it, so that we can be in a point of unrest and without peace, and Him allow us to go groping after Him, knocking the door for Him. It's exactly what we're doing this morning. Proverbs 10 and verse 22 says, "The blessing of the Lord makes rich, and He adds no sorrow to it." I'd like to read with you 1 Peter chapter 1 and verses 3 through 9. 1 Peter 1, 3 through 9. Peter writes to the Christians here, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to His great mercy, He has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead." Isn't that what the peacemakers or peace seekers are looking for? To an inheritance that is imperishable. And there we see the great motivation. You will be called sons of God. That is, you are going to be a son of the Father who is going to give you an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, unfading, kept in heaven for you, who by God's power are being guarded through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Though you've not seen Him, you love Him. Though you do not now see Him, you believe in Him and rejoice with joy that is inexpressible and filled with glory, obtaining the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. That's what I want. You know, the wars that are going around, the news that promotes all bad news, the unrest that we have within our country that we are living in, that God has placed us in, the battles that we face with aging, with cancer, with seasons of unrest, seasons of spiritual leprosy. You know, I'm tired of that. I'm tired of living here. Everybody dies. The righteous die. The evil die. Everything dies. We're getting ready to go into a season where we see the beauty of the fall and the leaves and the colors and the majesty of God's handiwork, of how awesome He is as a creator. A beautiful architect. Going to enter into a winter where we don't see life on the trees anymore. Animals go into hiding. They hibernate. Some of them leave entirely. And it becomes a world of death. You notice that? It happens every year. This reminder of death. The only thing good about that is that it doesn't last forever, does it? It gives way to life. God has placed people in the world. He's disciplining those who would trust Him into being His peacemakers. Now, very quickly, I'd like to come to a conclusion. I'd like us to understand how awesome this is. In Psalm 118, verses 8 through 24, there's another passage I'd like to bring to our attention. Psalm 118. Beginning in verse 8. I'd like to conclude with a couple verses, or a couple different passages here to help this rain home for us. You'll notice that this was how I introduced the lesson too of the Old Testament psalmist who talked about being surrounded by his enemies. It's written, "It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in man. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in princes. All nations surrounded me. In the name of the Lord I cut them off. They surrounded me on every side. In the name of the Lord I cut them off. They surrounded me like bees. They went out like a fire among thorns. In the name of the Lord I cut them off. I was pushed hard so that I was falling, but the Lord helped me. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. Glad songs of salvation are in the tents of the righteous. The right hand of the Lord does valiantly. The right hand of the Lord exalts. The right hand of the Lord does valiantly. I shall not die, but I shall live and recount the deeds of the Lord. The Lord has disciplined me severely, but He has not given me over to death. Open to me the gates of righteousness, that I may enter through them, and give thanks to the Lord, that this is the gate of the Lord. The righteous shall enter through it. I thank you that you have answered me and have become my salvation. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." Now, oftentimes we see that passage being, or that last verse being just quoted by itself. But you see the impact of it. This is the day that the Lord has made. Surrounded by evil, surrounded by wickedness, surrounded by death. Yet the Lord delivered me out of them all. Yet I cut off the enemy. I exalt the Lord. I trust the Lord. He is salvation. Do you trust Him? I'm going to tell you that's something that you already know. Trust does not come easy when we can simply choose to do whatever we want. The very nature of trusting anyone is hoping that what they say is true. And I am telling you what Jesus says and what God has said, it is true. If you are a peace seeker, He can give you peace that is unmatching of any psychologist, any helper of this world, anything, any problem, any drug, any relief that you're seeking that is limited to this realm. God can give you a peace that passes this into an unfathomable state. And I wonder if you'll trust this. Psalm 40 and verse 1. I think it interesting how this is comparable. Blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust, who does not turn to the proud, to those who go astray after a lie. Do you trust Him? If you're a peace seeker, I beg you to trust Him. But if you're a peacemaker, I pray that you do not neglect your responsibility. And I pray that you pray for me to do what I can, and so that I can see where I can help others have peace, where there is no peace. And I hope that you will see the great talent and abilities that God has blessed you with, not saying that you have those as your greatest quality. And please don't allow yourself to become over-humbled by saying, well, I'm not good at this, or I can't come to that person's aid because of such and such. Sometimes we do need that child to tell us, and sometimes we need to be that child to plant the seed, to help others see that there's someone that can help, and to introduce them. And hopefully that we'll be able to introduce them to our Father who has brought us such peace. If we can bring you that peace, please let us. Let's now be encouraged by this song of invitation.